The mop bucket clattered against the polished floor as recruit Hollister's shoulder connected with the old janitor's arm. The impact sent dirty water splashing across tiles that had been cleaned moments before. Hollister did not look back. Instead, his voice carried down the corridor loud enough for everyone to hear. "Watch out for Shuffles, boys. He moves like he is already dead." 3 recruits laughed. The sound echoed off the walls of the squad bay hallway like small explosions. The old man with the pronounced limp simply bent down and retrieved his mop. His hands were steady. His face betrayed nothing. What none of them knew, and what none of them could possibly know, was that those same hands had once held a rifle that changed the course of an operation still classified by the Pentagon. And in exactly 48 hours at the Warrior Legacy ceremony, in front of the entire base, every one of those laughing recruits would learn exactly who they had been mocking. The janitor's name was Elias Crane, and he had been invisible for 15 years by choice. He wrung out the mop with mechanical precision and began cleaning the floor again. His movements were slow because of the leg that had never healed right, but there was something in the economy of motion that did not match a lifetime of pushing brooms and emptying trash cans. His pale gray eyes tracked the retreating recruits without his head moving. An old habit, a dangerous habit from a life he had tried to bury. Hollister stopped at the end of the corridor and turned to perform for his audience. Webb and Briggs flanked him like loyal dogs waiting for their master's next trick. "You know what Shuffles reminds me of?" Hollister raised his voice even louder. "One of those old dogs that should have been put down years ago, but nobody has the heart to do it. Just shuffling around waiting to die." Webb mimicked the janitor's limp with exaggerated movements, dragging his foot behind him. Briggs doubled over laughing. Other recruits in the hallway looked uncomfortable, but said nothing. In the Marine Corps, you did not make enemies of the loud ones. Not when you were new. Not when you were trying to survive. Elias continued mopping. His expression remained unchanged. If you looked closely, and no one ever did, you might have noticed the slight tightening of his jaw. You might have noticed the way his knuckles whitened for just a moment on the mop handle before relaxing again. But no one looked closely at janitors. That was the point. A metal tray clattered to the ground somewhere behind him, and Elias's body moved before his mind could stop it. His weight shifted to his good leg. His hands repositioned on the mop handle the way they would have repositioned on a rifle. His eyes swept the corridor in a tactical scan, identifying entry points and potential threats in the span of a heartbeat. Then he caught himself. The tray had simply slipped from a recruit's hands. There was no threat. There never was any more. Elias forced his shoulders to relax and resumed his shuffling gait. But someone had noticed. Private First Class Amara Chin stood near the water fountain, and her eyes had not left the janitor since the moment he moved. She had been raised by grandparents who survived Vietnam. She knew what combat reflexes looked like. She knew the difference between a man who had been trained and a man who had been tested. And what she had just seen in that old janitor's instinctive response was not training. It was something deeper, something forged in fire. The PA system crackled to life. "Attention, all personnel. This is a reminder that the annual Warrior Legacy ceremony will take place in 48 hours on the main parade deck. Colonel Stokes expects all facilities to be inspection ready. Base Commander emphasizes that this ceremony honors our fallen and demands our highest standards of presentation and respect." Elias paused his mopping and looked toward the speaker mounted on the wall. The Warrior Legacy ceremony. He knew what it meant to lose brothers. He knew it better than anyone on this base, though none of them would ever believe it. His hand moved unconsciously to his chest, where 2 sets of dog tags hung beneath his faded blue maintenance uniform. One set was his own. The other belonged to a man who had died, saving his life 31 years ago. He could still feel the weight of Vincent's body in his arms. Could still hear the last words whispered through blood. "Get them home, Wraith. Get them all home." If you're watching this story from anywhere in the world, we would love to know where you're joining us from. Drop a comment below telling us your city or country. And if stories like this one about courage, sacrifice, and second chances speak to you, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us share more incredible true stories that honor the forgotten heroes among us. Now, let us continue. Hollister's voice cut through his memories. Hey, Shuffles. The recruit was walking back toward him, now emboldened by the laughter of his friends. You missed a spot. He pointed at the water he himself had spilled when he knocked into Elias moments before. Better clean it up before someone important sees what a lousy job you do. Elias looked at the puddle. Then he looked at Hollister. For just a moment, something flickered in those pale gray eyes. Something that made Hollister take an involuntary half-step backward, though he would never admit it. Then it was gone, and the old janitor simply nodded. Yes, sir. I will take care of it, sir. He began mopping the spill. Webb and Briggs exchanged glances. Did he just call you sir? Briggs laughed. I think Shuffles knows his place at least. Come on, let's get to chow before all the good stuff is gone. The recruits walked away, still laughing. Chen watched them go and then looked back at the janitor. He was cleaning the floor with methodical precision, but there was something in his posture now. Something that had not been there before. A tension, a readiness. She had seen that same tension in her grandfather when the fireworks went off on the 4th of July. The body remembering what the mind tried to forget. Elias finished cleaning the spill and wheeled his bucket toward the maintenance closet at the end of the hall. His small office waited for him there. A cramped space filled with cleaning supplies and the smell of industrial disinfectant. He closed the door behind him and stood in the darkness for a moment, letting the silence wash over him. Then he opened the supply cabinet and looked at the photograph taped inside the door. A woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile. Elena, his wife, dead now for almost 16 years. He touched the photograph with trembling fingers. Still standing, Elena. Still trying. The words were barely a whisper. A prayer to a ghost. A promise he renewed every day, though he was no longer sure why. Maybe because stopping felt too much like giving up. Maybe because somewhere out there his daughter was living her life, and as long as he kept standing, there was hope. Thin and threadbare hope, but hope nonetheless. He closed the cabinet and sat down in his worn chair. Tomorrow would bring more of the same. The insults, the mockery, the invisibility that had become his armor and his prison. He had earned the right to be forgotten. He had chosen this exile, and he would endure it. But tomorrow would bring something else too. Tomorrow Hollister would go too far, and everything Elias had buried for 15 years would begin to claw its way back to the surface. The alarm clock read 4:17 when Elias opened his eyes. He had been awake for 6 minutes already. 31 years since Mogadishu, and he still could not sleep past the hour when the extraction went wrong. His body remembered even when his mind begged to forget. He sat up slowly, feeling the familiar, grinding protest of his left leg. The shrapnel had shattered his femur in 3 places. Military surgeons had rebuilt it with titanium rods and stubborn hope. Physical therapists had spent 14 months teaching him to walk again. But the leg had never forgiven him for what he put it through in those final 200 meters when he crawled through dust and blood to get his team home. His apartment was small and sparse. A single room with a kitchenette and a bathroom barely large enough to turn around in. The walls were bare except for one photograph beside his bed. 2 faces smiled at him from behind glass. His daughter Elena at 23. His wife Elena at 41. The photograph had been taken the day before his last deployment. The day before, everything fell apart. Elias swung his legs over the side of the bed and reached for the chain on his nightstand. 2 sets of dog tags clinked together as he lifted them. He held them in his palm for a moment, feeling their weight. His own tags were worn smooth from decades of contact with the skin. The other set still had sharp edges. Vincent had only worn them for 6 years before they became a memorial instead of identification. Another day, Vincent. Keep me steady. He spoke the words aloud. He had spoken them every morning for 31 years. It was the closest thing to prayer he had left. The drive to the base took him past the hospital where his daughter worked. He slowed as he always did when he passed the employee parking lot. Her car was there, a sensible sedan in a shade of blue that reminded him of her mother's eyes. She was already inside, already saving lives, already being everything he had failed to be for her. He could have stopped, could have walked through those doors and found her, could have said the words he had practiced 1,000 times in the darkness of his apartment. "I'm sorry. I was wrong. Please forgive me." But the words always died in his throat before he could speak them. She had told him not to come to the funeral. She had told him she never wanted to see him again. And he had believed her, had convinced himself that his absence was a gift, that she was better off with a ghost for a father than a broken man who could not look at her without seeing everything he had lost. He pressed the accelerator, and the hospital disappeared in his rearview mirror. The coward's retreat. The same retreat he had made every morning for 15 years. The recruit depot was already stirring when he arrived. Young Marines in formation. Drill instructors barking orders that echoed across the parade deck. The smell of coffee and shoe polish and ambition. Elias parked in a maintenance lot and retrieved his supplies. Another day of mops and buckets. Another day of invisibility. He was refilling his cleaning cart when a memory hit him. It came without warning, as they always did, triggered by something small. The way the morning light caught the dust motes in the air. The distant sound of boots on concrete. Suddenly, he was not in San Diego anymore. He was in Mogadishu. October 3rd, 1993. The sun was brutal. The air tasted like copper and smoke. Vincent was beside him on the rooftop, steady as always, calling out distances and wind speed while Elias lined up his shots. They had been in position for 16 hours. 34 confirmed kills between them. The extraction team was pinned down 6 blocks east. The CIA asset they had come for was bleeding out in the back of a disabled Humvee. Everything had gone wrong, and it was their job to make it right. I count 8 hostiles on the south approach. Vincent's voice was calm, almost bored. That was his gift, the ability to sound like he was discussing the weather while hell burned around them. Elias adjusted his scope, acquired the first target, squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked against his shoulder. One down. Then the world exploded. The RPG came from a building they had cleared twice. Someone had missed a basement entrance. Someone had made a mistake. Elias never learned who. It did not matter. The round hit the wall 3 feet from their position, and suddenly there was nothing but noise and pain and the taste of blood in his mouth. His leg was shattered. He knew it without looking. The angle was wrong. The pain was a living thing eating its way up his body. But Vincent was already moving, already dragging him toward the extraction point. 400 meters of open ground with hostiles closing from every direction. "I've got you, Wraith." Vincent's voice was strained now. The boredom gone. "Just hold on. I have got you." They made it 200 meters before the sniper found them. The round took Vincent in the chest. Center mass. A perfect shot from an enemy Elias never saw. Vincent crumpled, and Elias caught him. Held him as the blood soaked through his uniform. "Get them home, Wraith." Vincent's eyes were already going distant. "Get them all home." "I will." Elias heard his own voice like it belonged to someone else. "I promise. Not your fault. Never your fault. Remember that." Then Vincent was gone, and Elias was alone with 200 meters of hell between him and the extraction point and a promise he intended to keep. He crawled, dragged himself through dust and debris and blood. His legs screamed with every movement. His vision blurred and cleared and blurred again. But he kept moving, kept signaling to his team with hand gestures because his voice had stopped working, kept fighting until they reached the bird and lifted off, and Mogadishu disappeared beneath them. They told him later that he had guided 8 men to safety, that his signals had kept them alive when the radios failed, that the operation was a success despite the losses. They gave him medals, a Navy Cross, a Silver Star, 3 Purple Hearts. They recommended him for the Medal of Honor, but the operation was classified, and the paperwork disappeared into a file that would not be opened for another 50 years. None of it mattered. Vincent was dead, and Elias had spent 31 years carrying the weight of a promise he was not sure he had kept. The memory released him as suddenly as it had seized him. He was back in the maintenance room. His hands were gripping the edge of his cleaning cart hard enough to turn his knuckles white. His breath came in short, shallow gasps. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool morning air. He forced himself to breathe, in through the nose, out through the mouth, a technique he had learned in therapy. one of the few things that actually helped. After a long moment, he straightened, wiped his face with the back of his hand, collected his supplies. The day was not going to wait for him to finish falling apart. He pushed his cart out into the corridor and began his rounds. The same floors he had cleaned yesterday. The same floors he would clean tomorrow. The work was mindless, and that was the point. It gave his hands something to do while his mind wandered through graveyards. He did not know that across the base gunnery Sergeant Patricia Okonkwo was staring at a photograph on her office wall. A photograph from 1993. A young Marine sniper receiving a Navy Cross from a 3-star general. The face in the photograph was 31 years younger, but the eyes were the same. Pale gray, haunted, unforgettable. She looked at the photograph. Then she looked at the maintenance roster on her desk. Then she looked at the photograph again. That night alone in his apartment, Elias looked at the photograph of his daughter beside his bed. 15 years since she had spoken to him. 15 years since he had heard her voice. And tomorrow, unknowingly, she would walk through the gates of the recruit depot. The Warrior Legacy ceremony. She was coming to honor a fallen colleague. A young Marine she had tried to save in her emergency room. She had no idea her father mopped the floors 15 feet from where she would be sitting. The parade deck gleamed under the morning sun. Elias had been polishing it since before dawn. His mop moved in long, deliberate strokes across concrete that had felt the boots of generations of Marines. Tomorrow this ground would hold the weight of grief and honor. The Warrior Legacy ceremony demanded perfection, and he intended to deliver it. His leg ached more than usual. The cold morning air had settled into the titanium rods and the scar tissue, and the places where bone had been shattered and rebuilt. He ignored it. Pain was an old companion. It no longer had the power to slow him down. Hollister's voice reached him before the footsteps did. Well, well, well. Look who is actually working for once. The recruit appeared at the edge of the parade deck, flanked, as always, by Webb and Briggs. Their morning PT had just ended, and they were heading toward the chow hall. But Hollister never missed an opportunity to perform. Elias continued mopping. He did not look up. He had learned long ago that eye contact only encouraged them. Hollister walked closer. His boots left prints on the freshly cleaned surface. Deliberate. Calculated. You know, Shuffles, I've been thinking about you. Trying to figure out your story. His voice dripped with theatrical concern. Let me guess. You washed out a basic. Could not hack it. And now you push a mop because it is the only thing you're qualified to do. Webb snickered. Briggs made a show of examining the floor where Hollister had walked. Missed a spot, old man. Several spots, actually. He ground his heel into the concrete, leaving a black scuff mark. Elias looked at the mark. Then he looked at Briggs. His face remained expressionless, but something shifted in his posture. A subtle straightening of the spine. A slight squaring of the shoulders. It lasted only a moment. Then the janitor's slouch returned, and he moved to clean the scuff. Hollister noticed the shift. It made him uncomfortable in a way he could not name. So he pushed harder. That is right. Clean it up. That is what you are good for. Cleaning up after real Marines. He stepped closer. Close enough that Elias could smell the sweat and arrogance radiating off him. You know what I think? I think you probably never served at all. I think that limp is from something stupid. Fell off a bar stool, maybe. Or tripped over your own feet. The words hung in the air. Across the parade deck, other recruits had stopped to watch. Some looked uncomfortable. Others seemed entertained. None of them intervened. Private Shun was among them. She had been heading to chow with the others, but she had stopped when she heard Hollister's voice. Now she watched the old janitor with focused attention. Waiting. Watching for something she could not quite define. Elias finished cleaning the scuff mark. He straightened slowly and looked at Hollister. His voice, when it came, was soft. Respectful. Almost gentle. I should get back to work, sir. The ceremony is tomorrow. Lots to do. He turned and began pushing his cart toward the maintenance building. His limp was pronounced. His pace was slow. He looked like exactly what Hollister said he was. A broken old man with nothing left but a mop and bucket. But Chin saw something else. She saw the way his hands gripped the cart handle. The way his eyes swept the parade deck in a quick tactical scan before he moved. The way he positioned his body so that he could see all three recruits in his peripheral vision even as he walked away. Those were not the habits of a janitor. Those were the habits of someone who had spent years expecting attack from any direction. Hollister was not finished. He jogged to catch up, grabbed Elias by the shoulder, spun him around. "Hey, I'm talking to you. You do not walk away from me." The moment Hollister's hand made contact, something changed. Elias's body reacted before his conscious mind could stop it. His weight shifted. His free hand came up in a motion that would have ended with Hollister on the ground, gasping for breath, if Elias had not caught himself at the last instant. Instead, the motion transformed into something harmless. A gesture of surrender. Palms open. Non triatening. But for one fraction of a second, everyone watching had seen something else. They had seen the janitor become something different, something dangerous. And then just as quickly, they had seen him choose to be harmless again. Hollister released his grip. He took a step back. His face was pale. What the hell was that? Elias's voice remained calm. "Apologies, sir. You startled me. Old reflexes. I will be more careful." He turned and continued toward the maintenance building. This time Hollister did not follow. Webb and Briggs exchanged uncertain glances. The entertainment had suddenly become something else, something that felt less like comedy and more like a mistake. Gunnery Sergeant Okonkwo appeared at the edge of the parade deck. She had seen the entire exchange from her office window. Her phone was in her hand. The call she had made to HQMC the night before had gone to voicemail. She was still waiting for a callback. But what she had just witnessed made her more certain than ever that her suspicions were correct. She walked toward Hollister. Her voice cut through the morning air like a blade. "Recruit Hollister, did I just see you put hands on base personnel?" Hollister snapped to attention. "Gunny, I asked a yes or no question, recruit." His jaw tightened. "Yes, Gunny." Okonkwo stepped closer. Her eyes were hard. "You have 48 hours until the Warrior Legacy Ceremony. 48 hours to learn what it means to respect those who came before you. I suggest you use that time wisely. Now get to chow. All three of you. Move." They moved, practically running toward the chow hall. Okonkwo watched them go, then turned her attention to the maintenance building where Elias had disappeared. Inside the supply closet, Elias leaned against the wall. His hands were shaking, not from fear, from the effort of stopping himself. 31 years of training did not disappear just because you traded a rifle for a mop. The muscle memory was still there. The instincts were still there. And for one terrifying moment, he had almost let them take over. He opened the supply cabinet and looked at Elena's photograph. Her kind eyes, her gentle smile. She had always been able to calm him. Even now, even from beyond the grave. "I almost hurt that boy, Elena." His voice was barely a whisper. "He is young and stupid and cruel, but he did not deserve what I almost did." He touched the photograph with trembling fingers. Then he closed the cabinet and sat down in his worn chair. Tomorrow was the ceremony. Tomorrow his daughter would be on this base. Tomorrow, everything he had hidden for 15 years would be tested in ways he could not predict. He reached under his uniform and touched the dog tags resting against his chest. Vincent's tags. His own tags. The metal was warm from his body heat. Still standing Vincent. Still trying. Outside, Gunnery Sergeant Okonkwo stood on the parade deck staring at her phone. Her contact at HQMC had finally returned her call. The file on the Marine, known as Wraith, was being sent to her secure email. Most of it was redacted, classified at levels she did not have clearance for. But what little she could read would be enough. She looked toward the maintenance building one more time. Then she walked back to her office to read about a legend she had studied in officer training school. A sniper who had saved 8 lives in Mogadishu. A ghost who had disappeared from the Corps 15 years ago. A ghost who apparently spent his days mopping floors and enduring the mockery of recruits who had no idea what they were looking at. That night, she sat at her desk for 3 hours reading the unredacted portions of the file. When she finally closed her laptop, her hands were trembling and her eyes were wet. She understood now. She understood everything. And in 48 hours, everyone else would understand too. The evening light cast long shadows across the cemetery as Elias made his way between the rows of white headstones. This was his other ritual, the one he performed every week without fail. rain or shine, holiday or ordinary day. He came here to speak to the dead because the dead were the only ones who understood. Vincent's grave was in the southeastern corner. Section 42, row 17, plot 8. Elias knew the coordinates by heart the way he knew his own heartbeat. He lowered himself carefully onto the grass beside the headstone. His leg protested the movement, but he ignored it. Pain was temporary. Grief was forever. Hey, brother. His voice was soft, rough with emotion. Been a week. Figured I would check in. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small bottle. 2 glasses. He poured whiskey into both and set one on the headstone. Then he raised his own glass in a silent toast. The recruits are getting worse. There's this one kid, Hollister. Reminds me of that lieutenant we had in 91. You remember, the one who thought he knew everything because he had read a book about tactics. Elias took a small sip. This Hollister kid mocks me every chance he gets. Called me Shuffles. Makes fun of the leg. He was quiet for a moment. The evening breeze rustled through the trees that lined the cemetery. Somewhere in the distance, a car horn honked. The sounds of the living intruding on the silence of the dead. I almost heard him yesterday, Vincent. He grabbed me, and I almost. Elias shook his head. 31 years, and I still cannot turn it off. You have laughed at me. Told me I was getting soft in my old age. But the truth is I'm still the same man I was on that rooftop. Still ready to fight. Still waiting for the next threat. I just do not have anything left worth fighting for. He took another sip of whiskey. The burn felt good going down. Real. Present. Elena would have known what to do. She always did. When I came back broken, she was the one who put me back together. Held me when the nightmares came. Talked me down when the walls started closing in. She never asked me to be something I was not. Just asked me to keep trying. His voice cracked. He paused to collect himself. I was not there when she died, Vincent. I was in a hospital 3,000 miles away, learning to walk again, and she was dying and I could not get to her. Could not hold her hand. Could not tell her. Elias stopped. The words stuck in his throat. Could not tell her I loved her one more time. The whiskey glass trembled in his hand. He set it down carefully on the grass. Elena Jr. blames me. My daughter. She has every right to. I was not there for her mother. And then I was not there for her. I left a note. Can you believe that? 30 years of marriage, and I left a note. Said I loved her. Said I was sorry. Said she would be better off without me. And then I disappeared. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Only pain. 15 years I have been watching from the shadows. I know where she works. I know where she lives. I drive past the hospital every morning just to see her car in the parking lot. Just to know she's still there. Still alive. Still okay. But I never stop. Never go in. Because what would I say? Iuni. Sorry I abandoned you when you needed me most. Sorry I was too broken to be your father. Sorry I'm still too much of a coward to face what I did. The sun was sinking lower now. The shadows growing longer. Elias reached out and touched the headstone. Traced the letters of Vincent's name with his finger. The ceremony is tomorrow. The Warrior Legacy Ceremony. They are honoring fallen Marines. Families are coming from all over. And Elena Jr. is going to be there. He paused. Let that sink in. She is coming to honor a young Marine she tried to save in her emergency room. A kid who died on her table. She does not know I work there. Does not know I will be 15 feet away pushing a mop while she grieves for someone else's son. His hand dropped from the headstone. He picked up his whiskey glass and drained it. I could leave. Call in sick. Disappear for the day. That would be the smart thing. The safe thing. But I cannot, Vincent. I cannot miss this ceremony. These families deserve perfection. They deserve to know that someone cares about honoring their sacrifice. And even if I am just a janitor, even if no one knows who I am, I can give them that. I can make sure every floor is polished. Every chair is straight. Every flag is hung with precision. He stood slowly. His legs screamed at him, but he pushed through it. Collected the empty glass from the headstone. Tucked the bottle back into his jacket. I do not know what is going to happen tomorrow. Maybe nothing. Maybe Elena will come and go and never know I was there. Maybe I will keep my head down and stay invisible like I have for 15 years. But something feels different this time. Something feels like it is building towards something I cannot stop. He looked down at the headstone one last time. The fading light caught the letters of Vincent's name, made them glow like something holy. If something does happen, if everything falls apart, I wanted to know I tried. I kept my promise as best I could. I got them home that day in Mogadishu, and I have been trying to get myself home ever since. I just do not know where home is anymore. He touched the headstone one more time. A gesture of farewell. Still standing, brother. Still trying. I will see you next week. He turned and walked away through the gathering darkness. His limp was pronounced. His pace was slow, but his shoulders were straight and his head was high. Tomorrow would bring what it would bring. He could not control that. All he could control was showing up, doing the work, honoring the fallen in the only way he still knew how. Behind him, the whiskey glass sat on Vincent's headstone, a offering to a ghost, a promise between brothers that death could not break. Across the city, Elena Crane Jr. sat in her apartment, staring at the black dress hanging on her closet door. Tomorrow, she would wear it to honor Corporal James Whitfield, 22 years old, killed by an IED in Afghanistan. He had died on her table despite everything she tried. His mother had called her personally to invite her to the ceremony, to thank her for fighting so hard even though she lost. She did not want to go. These ceremonies always reminded her of everything she had lost. Her mother, her father, the family that had disintegrated when she was 23. But she would go, because some things were more important than personal pain. Because the Whitfield family deserved her presence. Because running from grief was something her father did, and she refused to become him. She touched the black dress, felt the fabric between her fingers. Tomorrow she would walk onto that base. She would sit in the family section. She would honor a fallen Marine. And she had no idea that her father would be watching from 15 feet away, his heart breaking with every breath, his hand steady on a mop handle while his world fell apart. The morning of the Warrior Legacy ceremony arrived with a sky so blue it looked painted. Elias had been on base since 3 in the morning. He had polished every inch of the parade deck twice, straightened every chair in the family section until they formed perfect rows, checked the flagpoles to ensure the American flag and Marine Corps flag and POWMIA flag hung at precisely the right height. This ceremony mattered to him in ways he could not explain to anyone. These families were coming to grieve, to remember, to honor sons and daughters and husbands and wives who had given everything. The least he could do was make sure the stage was perfect. The least he could do was show respect through the work of his hands. By 7, the base was buzzing with activity. Recruits in their dress uniforms formed crisp formations at the edges of the parade deck. Officers in their medals and ribbons gathered near the reviewing stand. The Marine Corps band warmed up in the staging area. Their instruments caught the morning light and threw it back in golden flashes. Elias retreated to the maintenance building. His work was done. Now his job was to stay invisible, to watch from the shadows, to be present without being seen. Families began arriving at 8. They came in clusters, mothers in black dresses clutching photographs, fathers in suits that did not quite fit, siblings holding hands, children too young to understand why everyone was so sad. Elias watched them from the window of his supply closet. Each face carried a grief he recognized. Each family walked with the weight of absence. Then he saw her. Elena Jr. came through the main gate at 8:15. She wore a simple black dress. Her dark hair was pulled back from her face. She looked so much like her mother that Elias felt his heart seize in his chest. The same graceful walk, the same quiet dignity, the same way of holding her shoulders that said she would not break no matter how hard the world pushed. She was escorted to the family section by a young Marine in dress blues. She took her seat in the 3rd row, 15 feet from where Elias stood, hidden in the shadow of the maintenance building. 15 feet and 15 years of silence between them. His hand moved to his chest, touched the dog tags beneath his uniform. He could feel his pulse pounding against the metal. Every instinct told him to run, to disappear before she could see him, before she could recognize the broken old man her father had become. But he did not run. He stayed, because somewhere beneath the fear was something else, something that looked like hope, thin and fragile and probably foolish, but hope nonetheless. The ceremony began at 9. Colonel Raymond Stokes took the podium. His voice carried across the parade deck with the authority of a man who had seen combat and carried its scars. We gather today to honor those who gave their last full measure of devotion, to remember names that will never be forgotten, to stand witness to sacrifice that words cannot adequately describe. Elias listened from the shadows. He had heard speeches like this before, had stood at attention while generals praised the fallen. But today the words hit different. Today his daughter was in the audience. Today the distance between them felt both infinite and impossibly small. The ceremony continued. Names were read. Bells were rung. Families stepped forward to receive folded flags and whispered condolences. Elena Jr. sat motionless through it all. Her face was composed, but Elias could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands gripped each other in her lap. She was holding herself together through sheer force of will, just like her mother used to do. Hollister appeared at the edge of the parade deck. He was supposed to be in formation with the other recruits, but he had slipped away. His eyes scanned the area until they found Elias watching from the maintenance building doorway. A cruel smile spread across his face. He walked toward Elias with deliberate slowness. Webb and Briggs were not with him this time. This was personal, private, a final humiliation before the ceremony ended. Shuffles. Hollister's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried enough venom to fill a room. Should have known you would be lurking around. What is the matter? Hoping to steal some valor by watching real Marines get honored. Elias said nothing. His eyes moved past Hollister to the family section. Elena Jr. had turned slightly. She was looking toward the maintenance building, toward the commotion, toward him. His blood went cold. Hollister followed his gaze, saw the woman in black looking their way. "Oh, you know someone out there?" He laughed quietly. "Let me guess. Your daughter, the one who is too ashamed to admit her father is a crippled janitor." Elias's jaw tightened. His hands curled into fists at his sides. The old reflexes stirred. The muscle memory of 31 years begged to be unleashed. Hollister saw the reaction and pressed harder. "That is it not? She does not even know you are here. Probably thinks you are dead. Probably hopes you are dead. Must be embarrassing having a father who cannot even." "Enough." The voice came from behind Hollister. Gunnery Sergeant Okonkwo stood there. Her face was carved from stone. Her eyes burned with barely contained fury. Hollister snapped to attention. "Gunny, I know exactly what you were doing, recruit." Okonkwo stepped closer. "And I know exactly who you were doing it to." She looked at Elias. Her expression shifted, softened into something like reverence. "I received a file yesterday. Took me 3 hours to read the parts that were not redacted." Hollister's face went pale. "Gunny, what are you?" Okonkwo ignored him. She kept her eyes on Elias. "Sergeant Major Crane." "Sir, I am honored to meet you." The words hung in the air. Hollister's mouth fell open. "Sergeant Major, the highest enlisted rank in the Corps." He looked at the old janitor, at the limp, at the worn uniform, at the steady hands and the pale gray eyes that suddenly seemed to hold depths he had never noticed. "I do not." Hollister's voice cracked. "I do not understand." "No." Okonkwo turned to face him. "You do not. But you are about to." From the family section, Elena Jr. was still watching. She could not hear what was being said, but she could see the young recruit's face going white, could see the female gunnery sergeant standing at attention before the old janitor, could see something unfolding that did not make sense, something that made her stand up from her seat, something that made her take her first step toward the maintenance building, toward the truth she had been running from for 15 years. Elena Jr. moved through the seated families with quiet determination. Something was happening near the maintenance building, something that pulled at her in ways she could not explain. The old janitor, the young recruit with the pale face, the gunnery sergeant standing at attention. None of it made sense, but all of it felt important. Behind her, the ceremony continued. Another name was being read. Another bell was being rung, but she could not focus on that now. Her feet carried her forward as if they had a will of their own. Elias saw her coming, his daughter, walking toward him across the parade deck, each step closing the distance that 15 years of silence had created. His throat tightened. His hands began to tremble. He wanted to run, wanted to disappear into the maintenance building and hide until she was gone. But his legs would not move. His body had finally betrayed him in a way the shrapnel never had. Gunnery Sergeant Okonkwo was still speaking to Hollister. Her voice was low but intense. "You have no idea what you have done, recruit. No idea who this man is or what he has sacrificed." She pulled out her phone, opened a file, held it up so Hollister could see the screen. "This is a Navy Cross citation, awarded for extraordinary heroism in combat. Do you know what it takes to earn a Navy Cross?" Hollister shook his head. His arrogance had evaporated. In its place was something that looked like fear. "It takes being willing to die so that others can live." Okonkwo's voice cracked. "It takes crawling 200 meters on a shattered femur because you promised your dying friend you would get your team home. It takes 37 confirmed kills in a single operation because every shot meant another American soldier survived." She lowered the phone, looked at Elias with eyes that glistened. "Call sign Wraith, the Angel of Mogadishu. 127 confirmed kills over 3 deployments. Recommended for the Medal of Honor, but the operation was classified, so they gave him a Navy Cross instead." She paused. "And you call them shuffles." Hollister's knees buckled slightly. He caught himself on the wall of the maintenance building. His face had gone from pale to gray. The magnitude of his mistake was settling into his bones like poison. Elena Jr. stopped 10 feet away. She had heard the last part of Okonkwo's speech. Navy Cross, Angel of Mogadishu, Wraith. The words tumbled through her mind like stones in a river. She knew that call sign. Her mother had whispered it sometimes when she thought Elena was not listening, had traced the letters on old photographs with trembling fingers. Her eyes moved to the old janitor, really looked at him for the first time, past the worn uniform, past the limp, past the weathered face and the gray hair. She looked into his eyes, pale gray, haunted, familiar. The world stopped spinning. "Dad." The word came out as a whisper, broken, disbelieving. Elias could not speak. His voice had abandoned him the way it had abandoned him in Mogadishu when he was crawling through dust and blood. All he could do was stand there, frozen, watching his daughter's face cycle through shock and confusion and something that might have been hope. Okonkwo stepped back. She understood that this moment was no longer about military protocol or chain of command. This was something deeper, something sacred. She put a hand on Hollister's shoulder and pulled him away, giving father and daughter the space they needed. Elena Jr. took another step forward. Her hands were shaking. Tears were forming in her eyes, but she blinked them back. 15 years. 15 years I thought you were dead. 15 years I searched for you. Called every VA hospital, every homeless shelter, every morgue that would take my calls. Elias found his voice. It came out rough, damaged. "I thought you wanted me gone. After your mother. After everything. You said I was 23 years old." Elena's voice cracked. "I had just lost my mother. I was angry and scared and grieving, and I said things I did not mean. And you believed them. You actually believed I wanted you to disappear." The accusation hung in the air between them. Elias had no defense. She was right. He had believed her, had taken her grief-stricken words as gospel truth and used them as permission to run. "I saw you," Elena continued. Her voice was stronger now, fueled by 15 years of pain. "I saw your car, parked outside the hospital, every morning for the last 3 years. You drove past, and you never stopped. You watched me from a distance like a ghost, and you never once had the courage to walk through those doors." Elias's face crumbled. The stoic mask he had worn for 15 years finally shattered. She knew. She had always known. And still he had stayed away. "I could not face you." His voice was barely audible. "After what I did, after leaving you alone, I could not look at you without seeing everything I failed to be. Every promise I broke. Every moment I missed. You graduated medical school, and I watched from across the street. You got engaged, and I saw the announcement in the paper. You." He stopped. The words were too heavy to carry. Elena closed the distance between them. 2 feet. 1 foot. Close enough to touch. Close enough to see the tears cutting tracks through the weathered lines of his face. You missed everything. Her voice was soft now, the anger giving way to something else. Something that had been waiting beneath the surface for 15 years. You missed my wedding, my divorce, the day I became an attending physician, the night I almost gave up, and you were not there to talk me back from the edge. She reached out, touched his face, felt the stubble and the scars and the warmth of skin she had not touched since she was 23 years old. But you are here now. The words broke him completely. Elias Crane, Sergeant Major, call sign Wraith. The man who had crawled through hell on a shattered femur. The man who had held his dying friend and kept a promise that cost him everything. That man crumbled like paper in a storm. He wept, shoulders shaking, hands gripping his daughter's arms like she was the only solid thing in a world that had turned to water. 15 years of grief and guilt and loneliness poured out of him in waves that he could not control. Elena held him, the way her mother used to hold him when the nightmares came, the way he should have held her when her mother died. Around them, the ceremony continued. Names were read, bells were rung, but in the shadow of the maintenance building, something else was happening. Something that had been broken for 15 years was finally beginning to heal. And Hollister watched from 20 feet away, his face wet with tears he did not understand, his world shattered by the realization of what cruelty truly costs. The embrace lasted for what felt like hours. Father and daughter holding each other in the shadow of the maintenance building while the ceremony continued behind them. Elias could feel his daughter's heartbeat against his chest, could feel the warmth of her arms around him, could feel 15 years of ice beginning to thaw in places he had forgotten existed. Elena pulled back first. Her eyes were red, but her gaze was steady. She studied his face the way she studied patients in her emergency room, looking for damage, looking for signs of what needed to be healed. You look terrible. Her voice carried a tremor of dark humor. When did you last eat a real meal? Elias almost laughed. It came out as a strangled sound somewhere between a cough and a sob. You sound like your mother. Someone had to. Elena wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. God, Dad. A janitor. You were a janitor this whole time. 15 minutes from my apartment. Mopping floors while kids half your age called you names. It was honest work. Elias's voice was steadier now. The tears had passed. What remained was the raw exhaustion of a man who had been carrying too much for too long. I needed to be near Marines. Needed to feel like I was still part of something, even if they did not know who I was. Elena shook her head. The disbelief was still there, but it was mixed with something else now. Something that looked like understanding. You could have come to me. Any time in the last 15 years, you could have knocked on my door. And said what? Elias met her eyes. Isuat Firth. Sorry I abandoned you when you needed me most. Sorry I was too broken to be your father. Sorry I spent the last decade and a half hiding from my own daughter because I was convinced she was better off without me. The words hung between them. Ugly. True. Necessary. Elena was quiet for a long moment. Behind them, the ceremony had paused. Colonel Stokes was conferring with his aides near the podium. Something had shifted in the atmosphere. Word was spreading. Whispers moving through the crowd like wind through tall grass. I was not better off. Elena's voice was soft. I needed you, Dad. When Mom died, I needed you, and you were not there. And then I needed you every day after that, and you were still not there. Do you have any idea what that felt like? Elias nodded slowly. I think I do, because I felt it too. Every morning, I woke up alone. Every night, I went to sleep alone. Every time I drove past that hospital and did not stop, I felt exactly what you felt. The difference is I chose it. I chose to be alone. You did not. Elena's face crumpled. For a moment, she looked like the 23-year-old girl who had screamed at her father to leave. The girl who had buried her mother and then watched her father disappear. The girl who had spent 15 years wondering if she had caused it all. I told you to go. Her voice broke. At the funeral. I told you I never wanted to see you again. I blamed you for not being there when she died. I said horrible things, and I believed them. Elias reached out and took her hand. His grip was gentle but firm. I believed them because I already believed them about myself. You just said out loud what I was already thinking. That I had failed her. Failed you. Failed everyone who ever counted on me. That is not true. Elena squeezed his hand. Mom loved you. She never stopped loving you, even at the end, even when she was dying and you were not there. Your name was the last word she spoke. Elias closed his eyes. The pain was physical, a blade sliding between his ribs and twisting. He had imagined that moment 1,000 times. Elena dying alone while he lay in a hospital bed, learning to walk again. He had never allowed himself to imagine that she might have spoken his name, might have been thinking of him in those final moments. She knew. Elena continued. She knew you would have been there if you could. She knew the only thing that could keep you away was something beyond your control. She told me to find you, to tell you it was not your fault. But by the time I was ready to listen, you were already gone. The words settled into Elias like stones sinking to the bottom of a deep lake. All these years he had been running from a ghost that had already forgiven him. All these years he had been punishing himself for a sin that existed only in his own mind. Gunnery Sergeant Okonkwo approached slowly. Her presence was respectful, apologetic. Sir, Mom, I am sorry to interrupt, but Colonel Stokes has been informed of the situation. He is requesting a word with Sergeant Major Crane. Elias looked at his daughter. The fear was back, the old instinct to run, to hide, to disappear before anyone could see him for what he really was. Elena saw it, recognized it, and refused to let it win. She tightened her grip on his hand. I am coming with you. Elias shook his head. Elena, you do not have to. I know I do not have to. She cut him off. I want to. 15 years, Dad. I am not letting you out of my sight again. Something shifted in Elias's chest. A weight he had carried so long he had forgotten it was there began to lift. Just slightly. Just enough to let him breathe. He looked at Okonkwo. Lead the way, Gunny. They walked together across the parade deck. Father and daughter. Side by side for the first time in 15 years. Elias's limp was pronounced, but his back was straight. His head was high. The janitor's shuffle was gone. In its place was something older, something that had been buried, but never truly died. The crowd parted before them. Whispers followed in their wake. Marines in dress uniforms stared at the old man in the maintenance uniform, at the woman in black holding his hand, at the gunnery sergeant escorting them toward the reviewing stand where Colonel Stokes waited. And in the family section, a mother held her son's folded flag and watched through tear-filled eyes. She did not know who the old janitor was, did not know his story or his sacrifice, but she recognized something in the way he walked, the way he held himself despite the limp, the way his daughter refused to let go of his hand. She recognized a warrior coming home, and somehow in the midst of her own grief, that recognition brought her comfort. Colonel Raymond Stokes stood at the edge of the reviewing stand watching the old janitor approach. He had commanded Marines for 30 years, had seen combat in the Gulf and Afghanistan, had buried friends and written letters to widows and stood at attention while flags were folded. He thought he had seen everything the Corps could show him. He was wrong. The file Gunnery Sergeant Okonkwo had forwarded to his phone was still open. Most of it was redacted, black bars covering operations that would remain classified for another 40 years. But what he could read was enough. More than enough. The man walking toward him with a pronounced limp and a worn maintenance uniform was a legend. A ghost story that instructors told at Quantico to teach young officers what sacrifice truly meant. And he had been mopping floors on this base for 15 years while recruits mocked his disability. Stokes felt something he had not felt in decades. Shame, deep and burning, not for anything he had done personally, but for the institution he represented, for the Corps that had let one of its greatest warriors fade into invisibility. Elias stopped 3 feet from the colonel. His daughter stood beside him. Their hands were still intertwined. He did not salute. His uniform was not military. His status was unclear. He simply stood there and waited. Stokes spoke first. Sergeant Major Crane. His voice carried the weight of formal recognition. I am Colonel Raymond Stokes, Base Commander. I know who you are, sir. Elias's voice was quiet but steady. I have seen you at ceremonies. Watched you honor the fallen. You do good work here. The compliment caught Stokes off guard. He had expected defensiveness, bitterness, perhaps even anger. Instead, he found only quiet dignity. The same dignity that had carried this man through horrors Stokes could only imagine. I owe you an apology. Stokes said the words deliberately, letting them land with the gravity they deserved. This base, this command, we failed you. We failed to see you. Failed to recognize what was right in front of us. Elias shook his head slowly. You did not fail anyone, Colonel. I chose to be invisible, chose to disappear. That is not on you or your Marines. It is on my Marines. Stokes' jaw tightened. I have been informed of how certain recruits treated you. The names, the mockery, the disrespect. He paused. That ends today, permanently. Elena squeezed her father's hand. She could feel the tension in his body, the instinct to deflect, to minimize, to insist that he deserved the treatment he received. She squeezed harder, a silent message. You do not have to carry this alone anymore. Hollister appeared at the edge of the gathering crowd. His face was ashen. His dress uniform suddenly felt like a costume he had no right to wear. He had followed at a distance, unable to stay away, unable to process what he was witnessing. Colonel Stokes noticed him. Recruit Hollister, front and center. Now, Hollister moved forward on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. He stopped beside his commanding officer and snapped to attention. His eyes stayed fixed straight ahead. He could not look at the old janitor, could not face those pale gray eyes that had seen things he would never understand. Stokes let the silence stretch, let it become uncomfortable, let it become unbearable. Do you know who this man is, recruit? Hollister's voice came out thin, cracked. Sergeant Major Elias Crane, sir. Call sign Wraith. And do you know what he did to earn that call sign? Hollister swallowed hard. The file. Okonkwo had shown him parts of the file. The words were burned into his memory. He served in force reconnaissance, sir. Sniper. 127 confirmed kills. He was wounded in Mogadishu in 1993. Crawled 200 meters on a shattered femur to guide his team to extraction after his spotter was killed. The words fell into silence. Around the Marines had stopped pretending not to listen. Families in the seated area had turned to watch. Even a Marine Corps band had gone quiet. And what did you call him? Stokes' voice was soft, almost gentle, which made it worse. Hollister's composure finally broke. His chin trembled. His eyes filled with tears he could not stop. I called him Shuffles, sir. I mocked his limp. I told him he was worthless. I said, his voice cracked. I said he should have been put down like an old dog. The confession hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. Hollister's shame was complete. Total. There was nowhere left to hide. Elias stepped forward. His movement was slow, deliberate. Every eye on the parade deck tracked him as he approached the young recruit who had made his life miserable for months. Hollister flinched, braced himself for whatever was coming. A blow, a curse, the righteous anger of a man who had earned the right to destroy him. Instead, Elias reached out and put a hand on the young man's shoulder. His touch was gentle. His voice was quiet. Look at me, son. Hollister forced himself to meet those pale gray eyes. What he saw there was not anger, not contempt, not the satisfaction of vengeance finally delivered. What he saw was something far more devastating. Understanding. You did not know. Elias spoke slowly, each word measured. You looked at me and saw what I wanted you to see. An old man with a limp. A janitor pushing a mop. Someone beneath your notice. That is not your fault. That is mine. Sir, Hollister could barely speak through his tears. I have been hiding for 15 years. Elias continued. Hiding from my daughter. Hiding from my past. Hiding from who I used to be. You cannot see what someone refuses to show you. He squeezed Hollister's shoulder. The same shoulder that had slammed into him in the corridor. The same shoulder that had helped knock his mop bucket to the floor. But now you know, and knowing changes things. The question is what you do with that knowledge. Do you let it break you, or do you let it make you better? Hollister's knees gave out. He dropped to the ground, not at attention, not in any regulation position. He simply collapsed under the weight of grace he had not earned. And Elias Crane, Sergeant Major, Wraith, the angel of Mogadishu, stood over him with a hand extended. Get up, Marine. We are not finished yet. Hollister took the extended hand. Elias pulled him to his feet with a grip that belied his age. For a moment they stood face to face. The recruit who had mocked and the legend who had forgiven. Then Hollister stepped back and snapped to attention. A real salute this time. Sharp. Precise. The way he should have saluted from the beginning. Elias did not return it. He was not in uniform. Had not worn a uniform in 15 years. But he acknowledged it with a slight nod. A recognition of growth. A silent message that said, this is the beginning, not the end. Colonel Stokes cleared his throat. The parade deck had gone completely still. Every Marine, every family member, every civilian contractor and visiting dignitary, all of them watching the scene unfold before the reviewing stand. Sergeant Major Crane. Stokes's voice carried across the silence. I understand you have been working on this base for 15 years, maintaining our facilities, ensuring our ceremonies are conducted with precision and respect. Yes, sir. Elias's response was automatic. Military. The old habits surfacing despite the civilian uniform. Stokes nodded slowly. And in all that time, no one knew who you were. No one recognized the man who saved 8 lives in Mogadishu. The man who earned a Navy Cross and a Silver Star and 3 Purple Hearts. The man whose operations are still classified because revealing them would compromise national security. The words rippled through the crowd. Whispers spread like fire through dry grass. Navy Cross, Silver Star, 3 Purple Hearts. The weight of those decorations was not lost on anyone present. I was not looking for recognition, sir. Elias kept his voice steady. I just wanted to serve, in whatever capacity I could. Gunnery Sergeant Okonkwo stepped forward. Permission to speak, sir. Stokes nodded. Okonkwo turned to face the assembled Marines and families. Her voice was strong, clear, trained by years of commanding respect. What Colonel Stokes has not mentioned is the full scope of Sergeant Major Crane's service. She pulled out her phone, read from the file she had memorized in the hours since receiving it. October 3rd, 1993. Operation Gothic Serpent. Mogadishu, Somalia. Sergeant Elias Crane and his spotter, Corporal Vincent Reyes, provided overwatch for an extraction team tasked with recovering a CIA asset. When the operation went wrong, Sergeant Crane eliminated 37 hostile targets in a single engagement. 37 confirmed kills in 18 hours of continuous combat. She paused. Let the numbers sink in. When an RPG shattered his left femur, Corporal Reyes dragged him 200 meters toward the extraction point. Corporal Reyes was killed by a sniper round during this movement. Sergeant Crane then crawled the remaining 200 meters on a shattered leg, while providing hand signals to guide his team through hostile territory. His actions directly resulted in the survival of 8 American service members. The silence was absolute. Even the wind seemed to have stopped. Okonkwo continued. Sergeant Crane spent 14 months learning to walk again. During his rehabilitation, his wife, Elena, passed away from cancer. He was unable to attend her funeral due to his medical condition. Upon his recovery, he was recommended for the Medal of Honor. The recommendation was downgraded to a Navy Cross due to the classified nature of the operation. She lowered her phone, looked directly at Elias with eyes that glistened, and then he disappeared. Took a job as a janitor. Spent 15 years cleaning floors and enduring insults from people who had no idea they were mocking a legend. The old Marine in the family section was on his feet now, his hand pressed to his heart, tears streaming down his weathered face. He had served in the same era, had heard the stories, had never dreamed he would meet the man behind them. Wraith. The word escaped his lips in a whisper that somehow carried across the parade deck. My God, it is really him. It is really Wraith. The name moved through the crowd like electricity. Veterans straightened. Active duty Marines stiffened to attention. Even the civilians felt something shift in the air. Something sacred. Something that demanded reverence. Colonel Stokes turned to Elias. His voice was thick with emotion. Sergeant Major Crane, on behalf of the United States Marine Corps, on behalf of every Marine who has ever served or will ever serve, I offer you our deepest gratitude and our most profound respect. He saluted. A full formal salute from a colonel to a man in a janitor's uniform. Behind him, Gunnery Sergeant Okonkwo saluted. Then the NCOs. Then the junior officers. Then the recruits. row after row of young Marines bringing their hands up in unison. Hollister among them, his face still wet with tears but his arm steady, his salute sharp. The families rose. Those who had served brought their hands up. Those who had not placed their hands over their hearts. A wave of respect washing across the parade deck like a tide coming in. Elena stood beside her father, watching him receive the recognition he had hidden from for 15 years. Watching the walls he had built around himself crumble under the weight of honor he could no longer deflect. Elias stood at attention. His body remembered, even if his mind had tried to forget. His back was straight. His chin was high. His eyes were fixed forward. The limp did not matter. The worn uniform did not matter. The years of invisibility did not matter. In this moment, he was not a janitor. He was not a broken old man. He was Sergeant Major Elias Crane, call sign Wraith, the angel of Mogadishu. And for the first time in 15 years, he allowed himself to believe that maybe he deserved to be seen. His hand came up slowly, trembling slightly, and he returned the salute. The parade deck erupted, not in cheers. That would have been inappropriate for the solemnity of the ceremony, but in something deeper, a collective exhale, a shared recognition that they were witnessing something rare, something that would be talked about for generations. And somewhere in the crowd, Private First Class Amara Chun smiled through her tears. She had known, from that first moment when she saw the combat reflexes in the old janitor's movements. She had known there was more to him than anyone realized. Now everyone knew. The salute held for what felt like an eternity. Elias stood at the center of it all, the eye of a storm he had spent 15 years trying to avoid. His arm trembled from the effort of holding position, but he would not lower at first. That was not how it worked. That was not how Marines showed respect. Colonel Stokes finally dropped his hand. The rest followed in a ripple effect that moved backward through the crowd like a wave receding from shore. But the energy remained. Charged. Electric. Transformed. Stokes stepped forward. His voice was quieter now, meant for Elias alone though others could hear. Sergeant Major, I would be honored if you would join me on the reviewing stand. This ceremony is about honoring the fallen. There is no one more qualified to stand witness than you. Elias hesitated. His eyes moved to Elena, his daughter, the woman he had abandoned and the woman who had found him anyway. She nodded, a small movement, permission and encouragement wrapped into one. It will be my honor, sir. The words came out rough and used to accepting instead of deflecting. They walked together toward the reviewing stand, Elias and Stokes, Elena following close behind. Gunnery Sergeant Okonkwo fell into step as an escort. The crowd parted before them, Marines snapping to attention as they passed, families watching with tear-streaked faces. The reviewing stand was elevated 3 feet above the parade deck. A simple platform with chairs for distinguished guests and a podium bearing the Marine Corps emblem. Elias climbed the steps slowly. His leg protested each movement, but he did not falter, did not stumble, did not show weakness. Stokes gestured to a chair in the front row. Elias lowered himself into it. Elena sat beside him. Her hand found his again and held tight. From this vantage point, Elias could see the entire parade deck, the formations of recruits standing at attention, the families in their grief and their pride, the flags hanging motionless in the still air. He had seen this view before, from the shadows, from the edges, from the places where invisible men watched ceremonies meant for others. Now he was at the center, and the weight of that position pressed down on him like a physical force. The ceremony resumed. Colonel Stokes returned to the podium. His voice carried across the parade deck with renewed gravity. Before we continue, I want to acknowledge what has just occurred. Many of you witnessed something extraordinary. A man who served this nation with distinction. A man who sacrificed more than most of us can comprehend. A man who chose to disappear into anonymity rather than seek recognition for his heroism. He paused. Sergeant Major Elias Crane has been among us for 15 years, working in silence, serving without expectation of gratitude. Today we finally see him, and we are better for it. Applause began somewhere in the family section. It spread quickly. Not the polite applause of social obligation, but something deeper. Something that came from the chest, from the heart, from a place where genuine emotion lives. Elias sat motionless. His face was composed, but Elena could feel his hand shaking in hers. This was everything he had avoided, everything he had feared, the spotlight, the attention, the recognition he believed he did not deserve. But he did not run. He sat there and let it wash over him. Let 15 years of hiding finally end. When the applause faded, Stokes continued. Today we honor those who gave their last, full measure of devotion. We speak their names so they will not be forgotten. We stand witness to their sacrifice so their families know they did not die alone. The reading of names began again, each name followed by the ringing of a bell, each ring echoing across the parade deck like a heartbeat. The families came forward one by one to receive folded flags and whispered condolences. Elias watched each one. He knew this grief, had carried it for 31 years. Vincent's face still visited him in dreams. Elena's voice still whispered in the quiet moments. The dead never truly left. They simply moved to a different room in your heart. A woman approached the podium, middle-aged, wearing black. Her face was composed, but her eyes were red. She accepted the folded flag with trembling hands, clutched it to her chest like a lifeline. She turned to return to her seat, and her eyes found Elias. Stopped, held. Something passed between them. A recognition that had nothing to do with fame or legend. A recognition of shared grief, shared loss, shared survival. She changed direction, walked toward the reviewing stand. Marines shifted uncertainly, but no one stopped her. She climbed the steps and stood before Elias. He rose to meet her. His legs screamed, but he ignored it. I do not know your story. Her voice was barely above a whisper. But I saw what just happened. I saw how they treated you before and how they treat you now. She clutched the flag tighter. My son, he was like you. Quiet, humble, never wanted anyone to make a fuss. He died saving 3 members of his squad, and he would have hated the attention. Elias nodded slowly. He understood, more than she could know. The woman reached out and took his hand, pressed it against the folded flag. I just wanted you to know, she said, that some of us see, even when you do not want us to. Some of us recognize what sacrifice looks like, and we are grateful. Elias could not speak. The words were trapped behind a wall of emotion that threatened to collapse at any moment. The woman released his hand, turned, walked back to her seat with the quiet dignity of someone who had learned to carry unbearable weight. Elena was crying silently beside him. Her father stood frozen, his hand still extended, his eyes fixed on the woman who had just given him something he did not know he needed. Permission. Permission to be seen. Permission to be grateful for surviving. Permission to stop punishing himself for still being alive. He lowered himself back into his chair, his daughter's arms wrapped around him. And for the second time, that day Sergeant Major Elias Crane allowed himself to weep. Not from grief this time, from something that felt terrifyingly like healing. The ceremony concluded with a playing of taps. The notes drifted across the parade deck, slow and mournful and sacred. Elias stood at attention beside his daughter. His hand pressed to his chest where the dog tags rested. Vincent's tags. His own tags. The weight of them felt different now. Lighter somehow, as if sharing the burden had reduced its mass. When the last note faded, Colonel Stokes dismissed the formations. The rigid order of the ceremony dissolved into controlled movement. Families gathered their things. Marines broke ranks to embrace loved ones. The parade deck transformed from hallowed ground to a space of reunion and remembrance. But no one left. Not yet. They lingered, watching the reviewing stand, watching the old janitor who had turned out to be something else entirely. Stokes turned to Elias. Sergeant Major, I believe there are some people who would like to speak with you. He gestured toward the crowd below. If you are willing. Elias looked at the faces watching him. Marines, families, civilians, all of them waiting, all of them wanting something from him that he was not sure he had left to give. Elena squeezed his hand. You do not have to. I know. Elias took a breath. But maybe I want to. For the first time in 15 years. Maybe I want to. He descended the steps from the reviewing stand. His limp was pronounced, but his bearing was different now. The shuffle was gone. In its place was the measured stride of a man who had finally stopped hiding. The first to approach was the old Marine from the family section, the one who had whispered his call sign, the one who had recognized a legend. He walked with a cane. His medals clinked softly on his chest. Cordell, Vietnam, a lifetime of service written in ribbons and scars. Sergeant Major Crane. His voice trembled. I served with men who served with you. Heard stories around campfires and places I am not supposed to talk about. Never thought I would meet the man behind the legend. There is no legend. Elias shook the offered hand. Just a man who got lucky and lost friends. The old Marine shook his head. That is exactly what a legend would say. They talked for a few minutes, shared the language of veterans, the shorthand of those who have seen what cannot be unseen. When the old Marine finally stepped away, there were others waiting to take his place. They came in waves. Veterans who wanted to shake his hand. Families who wanted to thank him for his service. Active duty Marines who wanted to hear stories that would never be declassified. Elias spoke with each of them. Briefly, respectfully. He was not comfortable with attention, but he was learning to endure it. Hollister hung back at the edge of the crowd. Webb and Briggs had disappeared, slipped away to avoid the reckoning they knew was coming. But Hollister remained, watching, waiting. His face was a mask of shame and something else. Something that might have been determination. Gunnery Sergeant Okonkwo found him there. Recruit Hollister. She kept her voice low. You could have run. Your friends did. Hollister shook his head. Running would not change what I did, Gunny. Would not make it right. Okonkwo studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded. Report to my office at 0600 tomorrow. We're going to have a long conversation about what happens next. Am I being discharged? That depends on you. Okonkwo's voice softened slightly. What I saw today, the way you broke down, the way you stayed, that tells me there might be something worth salvaging in you. Sergeant Major Crane gave you grace you did not deserve. The question is what you do with it. She walked away before he could respond. Hollister stood alone in the crowd, surrounded by people who now knew what he had done, what he had said, the names he had called a hero. This was his punishment, not discharge, not confinement, just the weight of knowing, the burden of shame that would follow him for the rest of his career. Across the parade deck, Elena guided her father away from the crowd. He was exhausted. The emotional toll of the day had drained him in ways that physical labor never could. They walked slowly toward the maintenance building, toward the supply closet that had been his refuge for 15 years. You cannot stay here. Elena's voice was gentle but firm. Living in that tiny apartment, working this job. You deserve better, Dad. Elias stopped walking. He looked at his daughter, saw her mother in the curve of her jaw, the set of her shoulders, the fierce determination in her eyes. I do not know how to do better. The confession came out raw, unpolished, honest. I have been surviving for so long, I forgot how to live. Elena took both his hands in hers. Then let me help you remember. Come home with me. Not forever if you do not want. Just for now. Just until we figure out what comes next. Home. The word felt foreign in his mouth. He had not had a home in 15 years. Just places he slept. Places he hid. Places he waited out the hours between one day and the next. I do not want to be a burden. You are not a burden. You are my father. And I have spent 15 years missing you. She paused. Mom would want this. You know she would. She would want us to be a family again. Elias closed his eyes. Elena's face swam behind his eyelids. His wife. His anchor. The woman who had held them together through horrors that should have broken him. She had spent their entire marriage trying to bring him home from the wars he carried inside. And he had repaid her by disappearing when she needed him most. Maybe this was his chance to finally honor her memory. Not by hiding. Not by punishing himself. But by accepting the love she had always wanted him to accept. He opened his eyes, looked at his daughter. Okay, one word, 2 syllables. The beginning of everything. Elena's face crumpled. She threw her arms around him, held him the way he should have held her 15 years ago. The way he would hold her every day for however many days he had left. Behind them, the parade deck was emptying. The ceremony was over. The flags would be lowered at sunset. The chairs would be folded and stored. Tomorrow the recruits would return to training, and the families would return to their grief, and life would continue as it always did. But for Elias Crane, something had ended, and something new had finally begun. 6 months passed like water, finding its way downhill. Slow at first, then faster, then unstoppable. Elias no longer lived in the sparse apartment 15 minutes from a base. He lived in his daughter's guest room, a small space with a window that overlooked a garden Elena had planted in memory of her mother. Roses, lavender, the jasmine that Elena Sr. had loved so much. Some mornings Elias sat by that window for hours, watching the light change, breathing in the scent of flowers that reminded him of a woman he would never stop missing. The adjustment had not been easy. 15 years of isolation had left marks that did not heal overnight. There were nights when the nightmares came, and Elena found him sitting in the kitchen at 3 in the morning, hands wrapped around a cold cup of coffee, eyes fixed on something she could not see. She would sit with him, not speaking, just present, the way her mother used to be. Slowly the nightmares came less often. Slowly the weight began to lift. Colonel Stokes had offered him a formal position at the recruit depot. Not janitorial work, something with meaning. A role that utilized his experience. A chance to shape young Marines the way he had been shaped decades ago. Elias had declined at first. The instinct to hide was still strong. But Elena had encouraged him. And Okonkwo had practically ordered him. And eventually he had said yes. Now he spent 3 days a week on base. Not with a mop and bucket. With a chair in the back of classrooms. With a presence at PT sessions. With stories that could never be officially recorded, but that young Marines would carry with them for the rest of their careers. He did not lecture. Did not demand attention. He simply existed. Available. Approachable. A living reminder that the uniforms they wore connected them to something larger than themselves. The recruits treated him differently now. Word had spread through the base like wildfire after the ceremony. The janitor, who was actually a legend. The old man with the limp who had crawled through hell to save his brothers. They approached him with reverence that made him uncomfortable. But he was learning to accept it. Learning to see himself through their eyes instead of through the lens of his own shame. Hollister was still on base. Okonkwo had kept her word. He had not been discharged. But his path had changed. The arrogance was gone, burned away by the fire of public humiliation and the grace he had been given despite deserving none. He sought Elias out one afternoon, found him sitting alone on a bench near the parade deck. The same parade deck where everything had changed. "Sergeant Major, may I sit?" Elias gestured to the empty space beside him. Hollister lowered himself onto the bench. For a long moment, neither spoke. "I've been thinking about what you said." Hollister's voice was quieter than it used to be. About knowing changing things. About choosing what to do with that knowledge. "And what have you decided?" Hollister stared at his hands. "I want to be better. Not just a better Marine. A better person. I want to look at people and see them. Really see them. Not just what I assume they are." Elias nodded slowly. "That is a good start. I do not know how." Hollister admitted. "I spent my whole life judging people by how they looked. How they talked. How they walked. It is like a reflex. I do not know how to turn it off." "You do not turn it off," Elias said. "You catch yourself. Every time you make an assumption, you stop and ask yourself if it is true. And when it is not, you correct it. Over and over. Until the catching becomes the reflex instead of the judging." Hollister was quiet for a moment. "Does it get easier?" "Eventually. But not as much as you hope." They sat together as the sun moved across the sky. Two men who should have been enemies finding something that looked like understanding. It was not friendship. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But it was a start. Elias visited Vincent's grave every week. That had not changed. But now Elena came with him sometimes. She brought flowers, sat beside him while he talked to the headstone. Learned about the man who had saved her father's life and given his own. "Still standing, brother," Elias said during one visit. Elena was beside him, her hand resting on his shoulder. "Finally figure out what you meant. Get them home. You did not just mean the team. You meant me. You meant my family. You meant everything I was running from." He touched the headstone, traced Vincent's name the way he had done 1,000 times. Took me 31 years, but I am home now. Elena Jr. is. He paused. She's something Vincent. Strong like her mother. Stubborn like me. She's going to be okay. We both are. The evening light cast long shadows across the cemetery. Father and daughter sat together in comfortable silence. The grief was still there. Would always be there. But it was not alone anymore. It shared space with something else. Something that had been missing for 15 years. Hope. Elena helped him stand when it was time to go. His legs still ached. Always would. But he did not lean on his cane as heavily as he used to. Physical therapy was helping, so he was having a reason to get stronger. The drive home took them past the recruit depot. Elias watched it pass through the window. The same gates he had walked through as an invisible man. The same parade deck where he had been revealed. The same buildings where young Marines were learning to become something greater than themselves. He'll be back tomorrow. Not to hide, not to disappear, but to stand witness, to share what he had learned, to honor the fallen by helping the living. If this story moved you, and if it reminded you that heroes can be found in the most unexpected places and that second chances are possible, please subscribe to our channel. And right now on your screen, you will see another incredible story waiting for you. Click it and watch it, and remember that every person you pass on the street has a story. Some of them might just be legendary. Thank you for watching. That night, Elias sat in the garden beside his daughter. The jasmine was blooming. The stars were emerging one by one. Elena Sr. watched them from a photograph propped against the window. "Dad." Elena's voice was soft. "I'm glad you came home." Elias reached over and took her hand, the same way he used to hold her mother's hand on nights like this. Before the wars, before the grief, before everything fell apart and slowly stitched itself back together. "Me too, sweetheart. Me too." The stars continued their ancient dance above them. Father and daughter. Survivor and healer. Two people who had lost everything and somehow found their way back to each other. "Still standing, Elena." Elias whispered to the photograph in the window. "Still trying." And finally, after all these years, finally home. The night wrapped around them like a blanket. Warm, safe, complete. And Sergeant Major Elias Crane, call sign Wraith, the angel of Mogadishu, closed his eyes and let himself rest. He had earned it.